The evening wind off Slaver's Bay came hot as a kiln and stank of salt, smoke, and old blood. From the high terrace of the Great Pyramid, Daenerys could see the city spread beneath her in terraces of pale brick and shadowed alleys, the harbors blackening under dusk, the stepped roofs pricked with 1,000 tiny fires. Meereen had bent the knee, or something like it. The old masters bowed lower than they had before. The freedmen shouted her name in the streets. The markets had opened again, and in the pit where men had once bled for sport, the sand lay undisturbed beneath a skin of moon-white dust. Yet peace in Meereen had a brittle sound to it, as if one hard breath might crack it from one end of the city to the other. She rested both hands on the warm black stone of the parapet and looked west, where the last red seam of sun was sinking beneath the world. Westeros lay beyond that darkness, far beyond. A name on the far side of the sea she had carried inside her, since she was a child too small to exile meant. That home had never once ceased moving. Every time she drew close to one fate, another opened like a door before her. Behind her, soft steps approached with an uneven, deliberate slowness that belonged to only one man in all the city. "I have brought you either a wonder," said Tyrion Lannister, "or the sort of lie men invent because plain lies no longer excite them." Daenerys turned. He wore a wine-dark doublet cut to fit him better than the first awkward garments Meereen's tailors had fashioned, though no tailor could make him less what he was: sharp-eyed, misshapen, alert to mockery before anyone else could offer it. In one hand he carried a cup. In the other, a roll of blackened parchment wrapped about a rod of dark red wood. Missandei stood a few steps behind him, straight-backed and watchful in a gown the color of pale green sea glass. Grey Worm kept to the edge of the terrace, where shadow had already begun to claim the corners. His spear butt touched the stone once and no more. Daenerys held out a hand for the parchment. Tyrion did not surrender it at once. "It came from Volantis by way of a merchant galley," he said. The captain had seized it from a ruined chest purchased in New Guise from a collector who insisted his grandsire had bought it from a Volantine family old enough to be respectable and rich enough to lie with grandeur. I say this only so your grace understands how many liars have had their hands upon it. And yet you climbed all these steps." "I did. I have a weak heart for dusty secrets." He placed the scroll in her hand. The outer layer was cracked and stiff with age, the edges black as if singed centuries ago. When she unrolled it, the parchment gave off a smell like old ash. The writing was in Valyrian script, sharp and elegant, though whole stretches had been lost to fire and time. Missandei leaned closer. "Can you read it, Khaleesi?" "Some words," Daenerys said. Her brother had taught her High Valyrian when they were children, though Viserys had taught with slaps as often as patience. The language came back to her now in pieces, not whole. "Enough to know I do not like the sound of it." Tyrion smiled without warmth. "That makes two of us." He took the scroll back gently and set it upon a low stone table between them, weighting the corners with a wine flagon and a bronze lamp. Then he read, translating as he went. "Beneath the third fire where the sea remembers smoke," he murmured. "The cradle remains sealed. Stone sleeps, blood wakes, flame obeys. Let no child of lesser stock break what the 40 wrought. Let no hand unmarked by dragon's blood claim what was hidden from the doom." "No, Daenerys was silent for a moment. Above them, a distant shadow crossed the bruised sky. She knew the beat of Drogon's wings before she looked up. He was hunting over the city again, vast enough now that all Meereen knew his passing by the sudden and panicked scattering of pigeons from the roofs. "Old Valyria," she said at last. Tyrion nodded. Grey Worm's face did not change, but his grip shifted on the shaft of his spear. "Men do not go there. Wise men do not," Tyrion said. Missandei's eyes moved from one face to another. "There are tales in the harbor. Sailors say there are burning cities beneath the sea and demons in the smoke." "Sailors say many things," Tyrion replied, most of them louder the deeper the cup. "But not all lies are false," Daenerys said. She laid her fingertips upon the line that spoke of stone and blood. Heat lingered in the parchment, or perhaps she imagined it. Her dragons had hatched from stone, had they not? Or what all the world had sworn was stone. 3 dead eggs, black and cream and green, and a funeral pyre under a red comet. Fire, blood, and death. She remembered the flames lashing upward and the taste of ash in her mouth, the blistering heat that should have killed her, the silence after. She remembered opening her eyes and hearing the first small cry. Tyrion watched her too closely. I should add one more detail before your grace begins dreaming of buried hatcheries. The scroll was accompanied by a tale. A red priest in Volantis has been telling anyone who will listen that the blood of old Valyria has been called home. I would dismiss the matter entirely, but priests are dangerous in inverse proportion to their sobriety. No. Which priest? Asked Daenerys. A woman named Kinvara. She has a temple the size of a city district and a talent for frightening merchants. She claims the flames showed her a queen born amidst salt and smoke returning to the 14 flames. Missandei glanced up. Salt and smoke. Daenerys felt the old chill along her arms, so the air remained hot. Salt from the tears on a frightened girl's face. Smoke from funeral pyres. From cities burning. From dragonfire. Men had been making prophecies around her since before she could hold a crown without wanting to throw it at them. Many queens are born amid salt and smoke if enough things are on fire, Tyrion said lightly, though he studied her expression as if measuring an answer. Daenerys looked back west. The last rim of sun was gone. Now Meereen blazed with its lesser lights and the sea beyond lay like dark metal. The city below had chained her as surely as any dungeon once had. Every petition, every compromise, every hostage, every careful act of mercy, every necessary cruelty. Queen of Meereen, breaker of chains, mother of dragons. Each name fit, and each name pinched. In the blackening sky, Drogon wheeled and vanished. How many dragonlord families were there? She asked suddenly. Tyrion blinked, then answered at once. 40, at the height of the Freehold, though some maesters dispute whether that number is ceremonial. The Targaryens were among the lesser houses. Not poor. Never that. Only not first among the 40. My house fled before the doom. On the word of Daenerys the Dreamer, Tyrion said. Yes. Then others did not flee. Others stayed and burned. Her eyes went to the scroll again. And if what they hid remained hidden, Grey Worm said, a thing hidden in a cursed place is cursed also. That is the sensible view, Tyrion said. One I hope your grace will embrace with uncommon enthusiasm. Daenerys gave him half a smile. You climbed all these stairs with a cursed scroll in your hand to tell me not to think of it. No, I climbed all these stairs because if I kept it to myself and you later learned of it, you would make a face at me that would hurt more than the climb. Missandei laughed softly. Grey Worm's mouth did not move, but Daenerys knew the sound had pleased him as well. It eased something in her for a moment. Then a gust of wind turned the lamp flame sideways and brought with it a smell like hot iron, so strong and sudden that all of them glanced upward. Drogon descended out of the dark like a falling piece of night. He landed upon the farther end of the terrace in a thunder of claws and leathern wings, knocking over a brazier and sending sparks skittering. Guards cried out below. Grey Worm lowered his spear point at once, not to challenge, but out of reflex so absolute it seemed carved into his bones. Drogon folded his wings in stages. His eyes burned red in the lamplight. Ashen blood filmed his jaws. He had been feeding again. Daenerys went to him without hesitation and laid her hand upon the hot scales of his neck. He made a low sound deep in his chest, half growl, half purr. Then, quite without warning, the great black head swung toward the table and the ancient scroll. Drogon bared his teeth. The parchment crackled at the edges, though no flame had touched it. Daenerys felt the heat rise from him in a wave. Easy, she whispered in Valyrian. Easy, my son. But Drogon would not take his gaze from the scroll. His nostrils flared. One claw raked against the stone, hard enough to draw sparks. Tyrion had gone very still. "Well," he said after a moment, "that is either promising or catastrophic." "Perhaps both," Daenerys said. She rolled the scroll up again herself and tied it fast. Only when the parchment was covered did Drogon ease. He lowered his head to her shoulder as if in apology, though no dragon ever truly apologized. They yielded or refused, all else men imagined. That night she slept little. When she did drift into dreams, she found no peace there. She walked black roads under a red sky and heard wings beating above towers made of glassy stone. She saw faces at windows, pale and beautiful, with silver gold hair streaming back as they laughed over goblets of wine, while far below, in caverns hot as ovens, men and women in chains dragged iron carts, laden with eggs the size of helmets. Then the laughter broke. The ground opened. Fire came screaming out of the earth. One by one, the towers bent and ran like wax. A woman turned to her from the smoke. Not silver-haired this time, but lacquered in shadow and starlight, face half hidden behind a lacquer mask. To go west, you must go east. To go forward, you must go back. Quaithy's voice was no louder than breath against her ear, yet it filled the dream. Daenerys woke before dawn, sitting bolt upright beneath linen sheets damp with sweat. Her heart hammered in her ribs. For a moment she could not remember where she was, whether she still smelled fire because she dreamed it or because the world itself was burning. Then she heard the sea and knew Meereen again. She rose, went barefoot to the window, and saw the eastern sky paling over the bay. Drogon crouched on a neighboring rooftop like some monstrous gargoyle, motionless except for the occasional ripple of his tail. He turned his head and looked at her through the dawn. "Stone sleeps, blood wakes." The words from the scroll came back to her clear as a bell. By the time the sun lifted itself over Slaver's Bay, she had already sent for Tyrion. The war room beneath the upper halls of the Great Pyramid had once belonged to a Giscari noble who had measured empires in slave caravans and tribute. Its walls were painted with conquests Daenerys had no patience to admire, but the table at its center was broad and smooth and could bear the weight of maps enough to redraw a world. By the time she entered, Tyrion had covered it with parchment and vellum. The blackened scroll from the night before lay unrolled beneath a glass weight. Beside it sat 3 other documents: a merchant's chart of the Gulf, a copied page from an old history bound in cracked leather, and a strip of pale hide marked in faded red ink. Jorah Mormont stood opposite Tyrion, broad shoulders seeming broader than ever under rough dark wool. The exile looked older than when she had first known him, more weathered in the face, as if every year of his long wandering had come to rest there at once. Yet when he saw her, he dropped to one knee with the speed of a man half his age. "My queen." She had pardoned him. She had not forgotten him. Some wounds changed shape but never wholly closed. "Rise, Ser Jorah." He obeyed. His eyes found hers only briefly before moving away. Whether from shame or caution, she could not tell. Daario Naharis lounged by one of the pillars, all bright arrogance in his embroidered coat, his dagger hilts catching candlelight. Grey Worm stood with his hands clasped behind his back. Missandei had taken a place near the maps, attentive and quiet. No one looked pleased to be there except Tyrion, who looked very nearly delighted. "Your Grace," he said, "I have spent the dawn arranging lies, half-lies, histories, and religious enthusiasm into something approaching a rout." Daario snorted. "A route to madness." "A route toward madness," Tyrion corrected. "Which, as any man who has served kings can tell you, is closer to ordinary governance than most would like." Daenerys came to the table and studied the largest chart. Essos spread beneath her hands, coastlines inked in green and gold, seas washed pale blue. Slaver's Bay, the Gulf of Grief, Volantis, the broken peninsula beyond, where the mapmaker had drawn smoke rising from stylized mountains, and then, as if his courage had failed, left whole sections blank. "That is Valyria?" she asked. "That..." Tyrion said, touching the smeared dark mass, "is what remains of how men once pictured Valyria from a safe distance." Ser Jorah's mouth tightened. "No chart will keep you safe there." "No," Daenerys said, "but it may keep us from sailing blind." Dario pushed away from the pillar. "Yes?" She met his stare. "Do you think I summoned you for sport?" His grin flashed white. "I thought perhaps you had grown lonely among scholars." Jorah shifted ever so slightly. Tyrion, wisely, pretended not to notice. Daenerys put both palms on the table. "I dreamed of the place," she said, "and before dawn I chose. We will learn what truth there is in this." Silence followed. Not shocked silence. None among them had served her long without knowing that once she had decided upon a road, argument must change from no to how. Even so, the weight of what she proposed settled visibly over them. Grey Worm spoke first. "Meereen needs its queen." "Meereen has needed me every day since I took it," Daenerys answered. "If I remain until it no longer needs me, I will die on its throne and never see Westeros." "That may be preferable to dying in Valyria," Tyrion muttered. Missandei laid one hand lightly upon the edge of the table. "If you go, you cannot go with banners flying. The city will know. The city always knows." "Then let it know only part," Daenerys said. "We tell the council I go to meet Volantis and treat with the Red Priests. That much is near enough the truth." Dario laughed. "So we dress madness as diplomacy. Better and better." Jorah ignored him. "The Doom killed dragonlords on dragons, my queen. It killed them in towers of fused stone. It killed them in cellars under mountains. No man living knows what waits there." Tyrion tapped the copied page with one crooked finger. "A few dead men left hints. Septon Barth writes that the Valyrians kept breeding pits and hatcheries in caverns warmed by the roots of the 14 flames. The dragonlords guarded those places as jealously as kings guard crown jewels. If the scroll is genuine, it speaks not of the heart of the Freehold, but of a lesser cradle near the eastern coast. More accessible, slightly less impossible." "Nay, slightly," Dario repeated. "It is the most comforting word I had." Daenerys looked to Jorah. "You have heard the tales of sailors. Tell me the worst." He did not soften them. That was one reason she had once trusted him so quickly. "Water's that steam under moonlight," he said. "Shores where no grass grows. Men who hear voices in the mist and throw themselves overboard. Ships found drifting blackened from end to end with no man aboard. The story of Princess Arya, carried there by Balerion when she was a child. She came back burning from within. She died raving, and the black dread returned with scars no man had ever seen upon him before." Missandei drew in a breath. Grey Worm's face remained stone. Tyrion spread his hands. "On the brighter side, the princess did come back. That suggests the place is not entirely one way." Dario barked a laugh so sharp it was nearly anger. "You hear him? We should all be reassured." Daenerys' eyes remained on Jorah. "Would you have me turn from this?" He answered at once. "Yes." There was no guile in it. No fear for himself. Only fear for her. That made it harder. "And if I do not, then I go with you." Dario's smile vanished. "So do I?" "No," Daenerys said. He stared. "No? I need someone in Meereen whom the captains fear and the sellswords obey. That is not a compliment, Dario, so do not grin at me. Grey Worm will choose an escort of Unsullied. Ser Jorah goes. Tyrion goes, since I will need a man who can read old lies. Missandei." "I go where you go," Missandei said, quiet but firm. Daenerys hesitated only a moment. "Then you come as well." Grey Worm turned his head slightly toward Missandei, and in that small motion lay more feeling than many men could show with tears. "You will remain," Daenerys told Dario, "with the Second Sons, the City Watch, and the Council of Freedmen I named last moon's turn. If any master imagines my absence as a door left open, break his hand on the threshold." Dario's jaw worked once. You leave me a city when I would rather take a cursed world. I leave you what I must. Tyrion cleared his throat before wounded pride could turn to quarrel. There is something else. This strip here, he touched the pale hide, was sent by Kinvara along with a sealed message. The priests of Arelor seem eager to aid your scholarly outing. Daenerys lifted the hide. It was not parchment at all, but cured skin, thin and supple, with Valyrian glyphs painted in a pigment dark as dried blood. A disc of red glass hung from one end by a leather thong, cut with a sigil of flame. What does it say? Tyrion glanced at it. The Lady Kinvara has a fondness for theater, but the sense appears to be this. The way to the cradle opens not to command, but to claim. Blood of Old Valyria, dragonfire. A spoken remembrance, which means either the vault is warded with old magic, or an enterprising priestess has discovered that riddles make people treat nonsense with respect. Missandei frowned thoughtfully. Claim and remembrance. Say it plainly, Daenerys said. Tyrion exhaled. It suggests the eggs, if eggs there are, were not merely stored. They were hidden from someone. Perhaps from rival houses. Perhaps from the doom itself. Perhaps from both. A long stillness followed. Daenerys remembered Viserys with his beautiful mad face, telling her stories beneath roofs that were never theirs. Valyria of 1,000 dragons. Valyria of roads that shone black as mirrors. Valyria where the blood of the dragon was law. He had never spoken of the slaves except as numbers. Never spoken of the screams beneath the songs. Men told the glories of the Freehold and passed swiftly over the price. What did she seek there? Power, yes. She would have been a fool to deny it. 3 dragons had changed the world. 5 might break it open. But there was more. A past buried beneath smoke. A question she had carried inside her since the day the eggs hatched in the fire. Why me? Why then? If the answer lay anywhere, it lay not in Meereen's pyramids or Westeros songs, but in the ashes of the place that had birthed her blood. She straightened. We sail in 3 days, she said. Grey Worm nodded once, already measuring men and weapons in his mind. Missandei lowered her eyes in acceptance. Tyrion looked like a man who had placed a coin on the board and was not sure if he had purchased glory or disaster. Jorah closed his eyes for the span of one breath, then opened them and bowed his head. Dario turned away to the painted wall and struck one of his daggers into the plaster so hard that flakes of a long-dead conqueror drifted down like pale ash. The next 3 days passed in a heat of preparation and secrecy. Daenerys held court as if nothing had changed. She heard petitions from weavers and freemen, disputes over wells, accusations against 2 former masters who had hidden silver in grain jars, a plea from a woman whose son had gone missing near the lower docks. She spoke of harbor levies, of road repairs, of tribute from Lazar. At night, she met in hidden chambers with captains and quartermasters. 3 swift ships were chosen, a lean war galley from Volantis taken in battle, a broad-beamed Meereenese grain ship refitted for provisions, and a smaller vessel with a hull shallow enough to nose into treacherous inlets. The harbor masters were told they sailed west on a matter of alliance and religion. That alone was enough to start 10 kinds of rumor. On the 3rd night, when moonlight silvered the bay and the city still drowsed in the hour before dawn, Daenerys descended to the river gate with her chosen companions. Unsullied moved in silence, bronze caps dim under cloaks. Tyrion muttered at the steepness of gangplanks. Jorah checked every knot with his own hands. Missandei stood at the stern in a dark traveling cloak, hair braided close, eyes on the black water beyond. Dario came with her as far as the quay. He had not spoken more than duty required since the war room. Now he caught her hand before she could board and bowed over it, though there was nothing courtly in the way his fingers tightened. If the dead of Valyria try to keep you, he said, tell them you belong to the living. She touched his cheek. Keep Meereen for me. I would rather keep you. She pulled away before either of them could say what should not be said. Grey Worm gave the signal. Ropes splashed loose. Oars dipped. As the ships slid out from the shadow of the pyramid and into the harbor's open dark, Drogon dropped from the night and took the air above them, vast wings blotting half the stars. A heartbeat later came Viserion and Rhaegal, pale and green in the moonlight, their scales catching silver. Men on the docks cried out and fell to their knees. Others ran. Daenerys did not look back again after the city became a scatter of ember lights behind them. Ahead lay the long dark water, and somewhere beyond it, the place her forebears had fled before the world burned. Volantis rose from the river mouth like an embered dream. Long before the ships came near enough to smell its spices and horse dung and furnace smoke, Daenerys could see the city's black walls lifting above the haze, older than the Doom and built in the same fused stone that no hammer could chip. Beyond them flamed 100 towers and the great span of the long bridge, crowded even at dusk with wagons, litters, animals, sellers of fruit and silk and flesh. Ships from every corner of the known world rolled at anchor in the roads. Their masts made a forest against the sky. The city watched their approach with 10,000 eyes. Some looked for a queen. More looked for dragons. The priests came first, rowing out in a lacquered barge with a gilded brazier at its prow. Their robes were red so deep they seemed black where shadow touched them. The tallest among them bowed from the waist as the vessels drew side by side, firelight gilding the tears tattooed on his cheeks. "The temple welcomes the mother of dragons," he called across the water in High Valyrian. "Kinvara asks that the Queen of the Dawn honor the Lord's house." Tyrion, standing by the rail, murmured, "One does miss being announced with such confidence." Daenerys went ashore at sunset with a small escort. The streets of Volantis pressed inward with heat and noise. Slave collars flashed in the crowd. Children with red priests' medallions ran barefoot through alleys, carrying torches taller than themselves. From open windows came the sound of flutes and the clatter of cups. Perfume and sewage mingled in the air. Every few steps someone turned to gape. The red temple dwarfed every building around it. Its steps spread wide as a plaza. Columns of dark stone flanked doors high enough for giants. Within, the heat struck like a blow. Daenerys had known dry desert heat, pyre heat, dragon heat. This was something stranger. Heat that seemed to seep not only through skin but into bone, as if the place had swallowed summer and hoarded it. At the far end of the vast hall rose a wall of fire taller than a ship's mast, contained within a bronze frame engraved with twisting glyphs. Before it stood Kinvara. She was not young. Power had polished her instead of time diminishing it. Her skin was the deep brown of old teak, her head shaved bare, her red robes heavy with stitched copper flames. Jewels burned on every finger. When she smiled, there was no kindness in it, only certainty. "Daenerys Stormborn," she said in the common tongue, her voice carrying easily over the hiss of fire. At last. Daenerys climbed the last of the steps until she stood before the priestess. The air shimmered between them. "You sent me a scroll and a riddle," she said. "Now I am here, dight." Kinvara inclined her head. "Because the flames told you to come. The flames tell many people many things." "Yes," said Kinvara. "Most of them lack dragons." Tyrion shifted somewhere behind her, perhaps irritated, perhaps impressed. Kinvara turned and gestured. Two acolytes brought forward a long narrow coffer of black wood banded in bronze. When they opened it, Daenerys saw within not gold nor gems, but a tablet of beaten copper greened by age, a rod of dark glass, and a folded sheet of hammered gold thin as leaf. "These were kept by one of the old blood of Volantis," Kinvara said. "They traded with dragonlords before the Doom and bought what scraps they could from the frightened and the desperate after. Most were lies, a few were true." Tyrion's eyes lit at once. "My favorite kind of collection." Kinvara ignored him. House Belares had a sea holding on the eastern edge of the peninsula, where the fires run nearest the shore. Lesser than the great houses of the Freehold, greater than the Targaryens in those days. Proud. Cruel. Rich in hatchlings once. When a sickness thinned their beasts, they hid a surviving clutch in a keeper's cradle beneath the mountain roots. The record says they meant to reclaim it after petitioning the Freehold for remedies. Yeah. And then the doom came, Daenerys said. Kinvara's gaze rested on her for a beat too long. And then the earth remembered every sin laid upon it. A strange answer. Not entirely false, perhaps, but shaped for the ears of priests. Daenerys looked to the copper tablet. Old Valyrian letters had been chiseled into it so deep they remained sharp despite corrosion. Tyrion came close, reading over her shoulder. "There," he said softly, pointing with one thick finger. "The third flame. And here, the sea gate. Gods preserve me. It might be real. Me. The blood remembers what stone forgets," Kinvara said. "So it is written in older words than yours, Lion." "Most older words were kinder without me," Tyrion replied. Missandei had been quiet all this while, but now she asked, "If the clutch remained hidden, why has no one taken it before?" Kinvara smiled. "Because no dragonlord returned. Because smoke and poison and terror kept lesser men away. Because some doors are not opened by greed, only by blood answering blood." Daenerys touched the sheet of gold. It was etched with a map so fine it seemed spun rather than hammered, all delicate lines of coast and road and mountain route. One route had been traced over in red lacquer later, leading from a narrow sea cave inland to a mark beneath 3 stylized flames. "If this is true," she said, "why give it to me?" "Because the world turns," Kinvara answered. "Because your line fled and endured. Because the dragons were not born to die caged in memory. Because the same fire that destroyed old Valyria may yet burn away what is rotten in the new." There it was, the seduction hidden under prophecy. Burn away what is rotten. Men had followed gentler words into worse slaughters. Tyrion seemed to hear the same danger. Old Valyria had an unfortunate habit of deciding what was rotten by whether it knelt. Kinvara's eyes flicked toward him like knives. "And yet, you go with her. I am a curious man. Curiosity and bad judgment are brother and sister." Daenerys let their sparring drift away. Her gaze had gone to the firewall again. Within it, shapes moved, or seemed to move. She saw for a heartbeat the outline of wings, then only flame. "When do I enter the smoking sea?" she asked. "At dawn tomorrow if you are wise. Tonight you will sleep beneath this roof, and let the fire speak plainly." Kinvara lifted the rod of dark glass from the coffer and placed it in Daenerys' hand. It was warm despite the cool of polished stone. "Carry this. The keepers of the cradle used obsidian not only for blades, but for memory. When the door denies you, show it what you are." Daenerys turned the rod. Tiny lines ran through it like frozen smoke. "And if the door does not deny me?" Kinvara's smile deepened. "Then pray it does not welcome you too eagerly." That night she stood on the temple roof long after the city's clamor had softened to a restless murmur. Volantis spread below in braided rivers of torchlight. The Rhoyne flowed black beneath the stars. Somewhere in the lower streets men sang in a tongue she did not know. Somewhere else, slaves were being beaten. The smell of the river carried tar, fish, and human want. Jorah came to stand beside her, keeping a respectful distance until she looked his way. He had never learned how to wear rich clothes, and had not tried. In dark mail and a travel-stained cloak, he looked more himself than any lord ever had. "You should sleep," he said. "So should you. I have slept on ships in storms. This quiet will not trouble me." She leaned both forearms on the parapet. Below, a red-robed priest crossed the courtyard with a lantern that painted him briefly gold. "Do you think me a fool?" He did not answer at once, which was answer enough that she turned to him with the shadow of a smile. "At times," he said. "Only because I have known enough fools not to mistake courage for wisdom." "And which is this?" His eyes moved toward the dark horizon east of the city, where the sea waited beyond the river mouth. "I do not know." That honesty was one of the few gifts time had given him. "When I was a girl," she said softly, "Viserys spoke of Valyria as if he had lost it with his own hands. He never saw it, yet he mourned it. Sometimes I thought if I could only walk those roads, if I could only touch the stones my blood remembered, I might understand why the world broke the way it did. Me, Ganda. The world breaks for many reasons, Jorah said. Most have little to do with blood. She glanced up at him. That sounds more like something Tyrion would say. He is clever enough for two men. Someone ought to speak against him on occasion. She laughed, and for a moment the weight on her chest eased. Then it returned. I am afraid, she said, surprising herself more than him. Jorah's face gentled. Good. She frowned. Good. A queen who feels no fear is a queen who mistakes herself for a god. Far below, the city groaned and glittered. Daenerys looked toward the dark east again. Somewhere beyond lay the smoking wreck of the Freehold, the birthplace of dragonfire and the grave of empire. Kinvara called her to it as if destiny were a road already laid. Daenerys had walked too many roads cut by other people's certainty to mistake a prophecy for a command. Yet, when she closed her hand around the obsidian rod, she felt a pulse of warmth, quick and living. At dawn, the ships left the Rhoyne behind and turned toward the open sea. The world began to sour 2 days east of Volantis. At first, it was only the water. The sea turned darker. Not blue-black, but black without depth, as if soot had been stirred through it. At noon, a skin of steam hovered in pale ribbons over the swells. Fish floated up belly-wide and burst when gulls pecked them. By evening, the gulls were gone. Then the air changed. It carried a bitter mineral tang that caught at the back of the throat and stayed there, mixed with sulfur and something older, sweeter, fouler. Men spat over the rail and found the taste remained. The deck planks grew warm underfoot by afternoon. Rope smelled singed even when no spark had touched it. Sailors stopped singing. Daenerys rode Drogon above the fleet for much of the third day, watching the sea and the shoreline beyond. The land, when it appeared through the murk, was broken into black humps and jagged ridges that might once have been green hills. Here and there, columns of smoke rose straight into the air without wind enough to bend them. Nothing moved along those coasts. No shepherd's fire, no fishing skiff, no birds. When she returned to the deck near dusk, Tyrion handed her watered wine and looked up at the reddening sky. It is remarkable, he said, how many of the world's frightening places insist upon being ugly as well. It was not always ugly. No, nor I suspect was half the trouble. They stood at the prow together while the sea hissed around the hull. Jorah kept close enough to hear. Grey Worm had set men with wet cloths over their faces near the oars, and another watch at every hatch. Even the Unsullied, who feared little that breathed and less that bled, moved with a sharpened caution. Tell me of Arya, Daenerys said. Tyrion turned his cup in his hands. That is not a cheerful tale. Then do not tell it cheerfully. He breathed out through his nose. Princess Arya Targaryen, stolen away. Or fled, depending which page you believe. Upon Balerion the Black Dread. They vanished for more than a year. When the dragon returned, he bore new wounds, long, ragged rents across his flesh, as if something with claws as large as scythes had tried to tear him open. The princess, Tyrion paused. She was fevered, burned from within. The maesters said creatures came forth from her. Worms with faces like hands. Things that died when cold water touched them. Oh. Missandei, listening from a few paces away, whispered a prayer in Nethi. And Balerion? Daenerys asked. Lived, Tyrion said. Which tells us only that being a dragon remains the best of all possible professions when visiting hell. Jorah's voice was rough. The king forbade all ships to sail thereafter. And yet here we are, Tyrion said. Eh? The first red lightning split the clouds that night. It did not strike downward. It moved within the murk itself, branching through the ash-thick sky in silent crimson veins. Men crossed themselves, prayed to strange gods, or clutched talismans at their throats. One Volantene oarsman began to sob without sound and could not be made to stop. Daenerys slept little. When she did close her eyes, she heard scratching beneath the deck that none of the others seemed to hear. Once she rose and went below with a lantern, only to find the hold still and empty save for casks, grain sacks, and the warm unease of a ship entering cursed water. On the fourth day, the mist broke for the length of an hour. The towers emerged all at once. Not whole towers. Ruined ones, broken off midway like teeth snapped in an old jaw. They rose from the sea itself, black stone glazed, smooth as glass. Some leaning, some sunk so low that only their crownwork remained above water. Bridges, half fallen, connected nothing to nothing. One spire had melted downward over its own base, frozen in a slump like wax under terrible heat. No man spoke as they passed between them. The water there was so still, it scarcely seemed sea at all. Steam drifted over it in tatters. Shapes moved beneath, great dark shapes that might have been rocks, might have been something waking. A bell on the provision ship began to ring wildly, though no hand touched it. Grey Worm sent 2 men to still it, and they came back white-faced, saying the metal burned their palms. Then one of the helmsmen cried out, "Harbor!" He pointed hard to starboard. Through a gap in the mist, there seemed indeed to be an opening in the black rock. Lanterns glimmering within, a quay, figures moving. Men lifted their heads. Hope sprang too fast and too foolishly. "There is no harbor," Jorah said sharply. The helmsman did not seem to hear. His eyes were wide and wet. "There, can you not see her? Gods, my wife." He lunged for the steering oar. Grey Worm moved before any other man. He crossed the deck in 3 strides, struck the man behind the ear with the shaft of his spear, and caught him as he fell. The illusion vanished at once. There was no harbor, only a wall of basalt slick with steam and the barest margin between it and the ship's side. Tyrion stared into the whiteness where the false lights had been. "I dislike a place that lies creatively." "Bind him," Grey Worm ordered. "Watch all men's eyes." By sunset, ash was falling. Not heavy, not yet, but steady enough to powder the deck and settle in the seams of cloaks. Rhaegal and Viserion flew lower than before, uneasy, hissing at the air. Drogon vanished repeatedly into banks of smoke and returned streaked gray. Daenerys went to the prow at twilight and saw ahead a narrow cleft in the rock where steam vented in slow white breaths. The sea there churned around hidden stone, yet beyond the cleft she glimpsed darker water and a crescent of shore. "The sea gate," she said. Tyrion followed her gaze and swallowed. "If the map is to be believed. If it is not, we shall know soon enough." The ships took the passage one by one with oars muffled, and sailors sweating at every line. Rocks scraped along the hull of the smallest vessel with a sound like teeth grinding. Boiling water frothed in pockets near the cliff where mineral vents spat bubbles big as a man's head. Steam blinded them more than once. Twice Daenerys heard shouted warnings and the crash of poles against stone. Once she thought the whole channel had closed before them, only to see the black walls drift apart again as the mist changed. Then, abruptly, they were through. The cove beyond was small and almost still, hidden on 3 sides by fused cliffs that curved inward like the lip of a broken bowl. A strip of black sand lay at the back of it, glittering with glassy grains. Beyond that, an ancient stair climbed the cliff face toward a dark opening high above. A stair, not random ruin, not nature. The ships anchored in water warm enough to send pale vapors up around their hulls. No one had to be ordered to silence. Men stepped ashore as if afraid the ground itself might hear. The sand hissed under boots. It gave off a smell like burned shell. Daenerys was the first to set foot on Valyria. Heat rose through the soles of her boots at once. Not unbearable. Living. The ground felt less like earth and like the flank of some sleeping beast with a slow heart under stone. For the space of a breath, she closed her eyes. She had expected fear, and fear there was. But beneath it, sharper than fear, was recognition, not memory. She had never been here. Yet something in her blood answered the place. Not with comfort. Never that. but with a terrible, intimate awareness. As if she had come at last to the source of a song she had heard all her life through walls. When she opened her eyes again, Drogon crouched on the cliff above the cove and watched her in perfect stillness. "Make camp by the ships," she said. "No fires. No one wanders alone. At dawn we climb." No one argued. That night the cove lay under a sky the color of old bruises. Red flashes moved now and again beyond the cliff rims. Somewhere inland a roar rolled through the stone and faded. The men huddled in cloaks and slept in snatches. Daenerys sat wakeful beside the dark surf, feeling the warm pull of the land beyond the stair, as if the hidden road were a hand laid flat against her breast. The stair from the cove had been carved into the cliff with a precision no mason in Marine could have matched. Even after centuries of neglect and tremors, it climbed in straight broad flights, its steps glossy black and unworn by weather. No moss softened it. No grass grew between the joins. Ash lay in a thin veil across every surface, disturbed only by the first marks their boots made upon it. At the top, they found a gatehouse split in two. One half had sheared away and fallen into the sea long ago. The other remained fused to the cliff by some monstrous heat, its arches warped, its iron portcullis run into black lumps like candle wax. Above the arch, a line of high Valyrian letters still shone faintly in the stone. Tyrion lifted his lantern close. "Sea Road of House Belares," he read. "By decree of the Freehold, trespass punished by fire." He glanced back over his shoulder. The Freehold had a gift for subtlety. Beyond the gate the road began. It was black as coal and smoother than any road Daenerys had ever ridden, laid in long unbroken bands that caught the light with a dull sheen. Tyrion named it a Dragonroad, one of the fabled ways the Valyrians had made to run across half a continent. Here it climbed and curved inland between low ridges of broken stone. On either side the land was all ruin. Once there had been gardens there. Daenerys could see it in the surviving lines, terraces, channels, balustrades. Now everything lay shattered, fused, or buried under ash. Trees had been reduced to charcoal ghosts standing in clusters where orchards once flourished. Bronze statuary slumped on plinths, faces melted smooth. A pavilion roof had fallen across itself in green-brown sheets. Here and there bits of color still survived beneath the soot, a red tessera and a mosaic of grapes, a blue eye and a broken frieze, a stripe of gold on a child's stone toy half buried in slag. No birds sang. No insect stirred. Their boots and the low clink of weapons made too much noise. The silence swallowed each sound and returned nothing. Grey worms sent pairs of Unsullied ahead and to either flank. The Dothraki who had agreed to come. Grim men too proud to show fear and too wise to deny it. Rode no horses here, for the horses had refused the stair entirely and nearly killed themselves trying to flee the smell of the place. The riders walked now with arcs drawn, eyes scanning ridges and openings alike. Missandei wrapped a strip of cloth over her nose and mouth. "It is like walking inside the memory of a fire." Daenerys knew what she meant. The air itself seemed scorched. Even where stone stood cold, the smell of old burning clung to it. They reached the first building around mid-morning, a low hall set back from the road with its front colonnade collapsed. On the steps before it lay the bones of 3 people twisted together, blackened hard by heat. No cloth remained on them. One skeleton still wore a collar of fused metal. Another had one hand thrust forward as if grasping for someone beyond reach. Jorah knelt briefly, studying the metal with a grim face. Slave collar. Daenerys stared down at it. Valyria, gleaming wonder of Viserys stories. Valyria, whose roads could outlast centuries and whose towers kissed the sky. Valyria, built by dragonlords and fed by chained hands. She looked up again, and for a fleeting instant, thought she saw movement on the rise ahead. Figures in pale silks turning their heads to watch her pass. The vision vanished when she blinked. Only broken pillars remained. Tyrion had paused at a wall, half standing within the hall. "There was a mural here once," he said, ashing it gently with his fingers. Dragons above, miners below, the usual arrangement. "Do all your histories reduce to mockery?" Missandei asked. "Only the honest ones." They pressed on. Near midday, the road widened into what had once been a processional way. Great statues lined it on either side, each twice the height of a man, each cut from black stone so polished it reflected them dimly. Dragonlords. Daenerys thought at first. The faces were noble, beautiful, proud. Then she saw that the left hands of every statue rested not on sword pommels or books, but on the heads of kneeling figures carved at their feet. Slaves. Men, women, children. Their expressions had been rendered with care enough to make the stone seem pained. One statue had fallen and shattered across the road. The kneeling figure beneath its hand had been crushed to dust. Tyrion looked up into the carved face of the standing lord and said, "There are moments when one feels history deserves its ruins." Daenerys said nothing. Her chest had tightened. All her life men had spoken to her of blood and birthright. Here at last she walked among the bones of what those words had once made in the world. The road turned after that and began to climb. Steam vented from fissures in the rock. Once, far below, she heard water rushing though no stream was visible. "The mountain roots ran under them," Tyrion said. "The fire beneath the world." At the crest of a rise, they found the remains of a small courtyard and a square basin in its center. The basin had long since cracked. Inside lay a spill of hardened black glass, and protruding from it, something pale. Missandei saw it first. A hand. It was small, child-sized. Daenerys knelt before the basin. The hand had been trapped as the glass cooled around it, bones half visible through the translucent black. Beside it, impressed in ash on the basin's outer rim where no wind had touched, were 3 faint marks like fingertips dragged downward. A child had climbed here, she thought, or been set here, fled here, died here. Her own hand lifted of its own accord and rested near the marks without touching them. The world tilted. Heat struck her face, but not the dead, heavy heat of the ruins. Living heat. She heard voices, dozens, hundreds. Bright, impatient, speaking high Valyrian too fast for her to follow. The courtyard around her flashed whole, banners streaming, fountains leaping, bronze braziers smoking sweet resin. A girl dashed past in a dragon keeper's leather apron, bare feet slapping stone, silver hair escaping its braid. She could not have been more than 12. In her arms she held something wrapped in red cloth and clutched hard to her chest. The ground trembled. Adults shouted. Somewhere a dragon screamed. The girl looked straight at Daenerys. Not through her. At her. Then the vision broke. Daenerys was back on one knee in ashen silence, Jorah's hand closing hard around her elbow. "My queen." She drew in a breath sharp enough to hurt. "I saw..." The words failed. How should she explain a dead child's eyes meeting her across centuries? Tyrion crouched nearby, searching her face with sudden worry. "What did you see?" "A girl," Daenerys said slowly. "A keeper, I think. She was running." "Toward where?" Tyrion asked. She turned her head and, to her own astonishment, knew. Beyond the broken courtyard, half hidden behind a tilt of collapsed stone, a smaller road branched upward toward the mountain itself. Its entrance was marked by 2 narrow pillars, banded in bronze. On the inner face of one pillar, barely visible beneath soot, the same glyph from Kinvara's glass seal had been engraved. Flame, coiled thrice. "There," Daenerys said. No one argued. Even Dario, had he been there, might have swallowed his jest. The side road was steeper and less well preserved. At places the stone had buckled into frozen waves where the earth below had surged and dropped. The heat deepened as they climbed. Their water skins warmed against the hip. Sweat rolled down backs and necks, though the sky remained veiled and sunless overhead. By late afternoon they came to the place. The mountainside had once been cut into a terrace and faced with smooth black blocks. Most had collapsed outward in a tumble of shattered stone. What remained formed the front of a long, low structure half buried in the slope. Bronze doors stood in its center, 20 feet high, and leafed with scaled patterns now greened with age. Red crystals the size of fists had been set in them at shoulder height. Ash had drifted thick against the threshold. The bronze showed no seam of opening. Only when Drogon landed on the terrace above with a crash of wings and a shower of cinders did Daenerys see the runes wake. Lines appeared in the metal as heat touched it, thin at first, then brightening to dark crimson. They coiled across the doors and around the crystals in a lattice of script so dense it seemed lace wrought from blood. Tyrion stared. 7 hells. Daenerys stepped forward. The air before the doors was warmer than the rest of the terrace, as if something breathed behind them. Missandei came near enough to speak softly without echo. "This is the place from your vision." "Yes." Grey Worm motioned his men outward in a guarding line. Jorah remained at Daenerys' shoulder. Even through mail and leather she felt the tension in him. Tyrion squinted at the glowing words. "I can make out fragments. Kept against ruin. No hand unblooded. Valyrians. And something about memory." He shook his head. "Gods. The damned priestess may have told the truth." "The dead often do," Daenerys said. Not because she believed it, but because the words came unbidden. She lifted the obsidian rod Kinvara had given her and laid it lightly against one of the red crystals. The crystal flared from within. At the same instant, something moved behind the door. Not a shift of stone, not the settling groan of old metal. A deliberate sound. A scrape, a thud, then a silence so complete it seemed to gather itself around their breathing. Jorah drew his sword. Drogon hissed. Daenerys did not step back. For a long moment, the only sound was Drogon's low, rolling growl. The red lines in the bronze pulsed once under Daenerys' hand and dimmed again. Heat soaked into her palm. Not enough. The door was testing, remembering, refusing. "Read it," she said without taking her eyes from the runes. Tyrion raised the lantern, squinting. The first line names House Valyrian in language grander than sensible people use. The second, what stone has swallowed, blood recalls. The third, he licked his lips. That is less pleasant. Let the claim be made by blood of dragon and flame of dragon joined, lest the sleepers wake for their enemies. Jorah said, "We can still turn back." Daenerys held out her free hand. Missandei understood before any other. She gave Daenerys the slim dagger from her belt, hilt first. "No," Jorah said sharply. Daenerys drew the edge across her palm. Blood welled bright and sudden. She pressed that hand to the center of the door. The runes flared crimson. At once Drogon surged down from the terrace above, landing hard enough to shake ash from the stone. Daenerys turned her face toward him. Dracarys. His fire hit the bronze in a sheet of black-red flame. The world became heat and light. Men cried out and stumbled back. The red crystals blazed like eyes. The runes burned so bright she had to narrow her eyes against them. Then, deep within the metal, something answered. Not a lock springing, a chain of many weights shifting after centuries of stillness. A thunder of hidden gears. The seam appeared where none had been before. Slowly, groaning like an old beast, the 2 bronze leaves began to part. Stale furnace-hot air rushed out carrying dust, minerals, and the unmistakable musk of dragon. Not living dragon alone. Eggshell, ash, old scale, old fire. The scent struck Daenerys so forcefully she swayed. It was like stepping back into the red waste beside Drogo's pyre, when the eggs had first cracked and the night had filled with impossible life. Tyrion lifted the lantern higher. God. The hatchery lay beyond. It was larger than the outside could have suggested, the mountains swallowing the true size of it. A broad cavern had been carved and faced with worked stone so dark it drank the light. A circular walkway ran around a central shaft from which heat rose in shimmering curtains. Beneath that shaft glowed a slow orange pulse far below, the hidden fire of the mountain. Stone channels cut through the floor led warmth outward into rings of cradles built waist-high from black basalt veined with red. Bronze chains as thick as a man's wrist hung from the ceiling and disappeared into pulleys. Galleries lined the upper walls behind screens of fused glass. Here and there, strange masks of beaten copper hung upon pegs, long-faced and expressionless. The place was still, not untouched. Ash lay over the floor, and in one section the ceiling had cracked and spilled rubble down across two of the outer cradles. But it had not been looted. Time and fire had entered, men had not. Daenerys took one step inside, then another. Her blood still shone wet upon the door behind her. In the nearest cradle lay an egg. It was larger than Drogon's had been, or perhaps it only seemed so after years of memory had changed scale. The shell was deep bronze, streaked through with green so dark it was almost black. Ash had crusted around its lower half. When she drew nearer, the color beneath gleamed faintly, as if light slept inside it. A second cradle held another egg long since collapsed inward, its shell flaked away to reveal only brittle black fragments and pale dust. A third contained a smooth oval mottled cream and gold. Beyond those stood more cradles, some empty, some filled with cracked shell, one with a small dragon skeleton curled inside it like burnt wire. Tyrion moved slowly around the ring, reverent despite himself. Sept and Barth rode of dragon keepers tending clutches in caverns under Dragonstone, he murmured. But this, his voice fell away. This is where the tales began. Jorah had not sheathed his sword. How many? 3 whole that I can see, Daenerys said. Perhaps more under the ash. Grey Worm led 2 Unsullied to each entrance and gallery. The soldiers' bronze caps caught the lava glow in dull red bands. Missandei stood beside Daenerys with her hand at her throat, tears bright in her eyes and no shame in them. They waited, she whispered. Yes, waited. The words seemed written in everything here. Daenerys crossed to the far wall. There, set into niches, were bronze tablets like the one Kinvara had shown them. Some green, some blackened. Tyrion had once set the lantern down and began lifting them one by one, reading aloud in fragments. Inventory. No. Lineage. This one names the sire dragon as Krivassos, which I devoutly hope I am pronouncing incorrectly. This one is damaged. Here. 3 eggs preserved against the fever. 2 weak. 1 fierce in shell. Fever? Missandei asked. A dragon sickness, perhaps, Tyrion said. Or a bad season, or the usual calamity that follows breeding creatures capable of setting cities aflame. Another tablet lay half-buried under fallen stone. Jorah hauled the rubble aside and Tyrion read that one too, slower now. The house petitions Volundaries for aid. Keep the 3rd cradle sealed. Do not present the bronze green to the Freehold. The old blood in it runs hot. Tyrion looked up. Interesting. Daenerys glanced toward the bronze green egg nearest the vent. Heat shimmered around it. Beside the tablets, half hidden in a niche, sat the small skeleton of a human body. Not a full-grown body. The bones were too slight. It had collapsed, seated against the wall with knees drawn up. Around one wrist still hung a bracelet of linked bronze keys. The vision struck her again, the silver-haired girl racing across a courtyard as the world shook apart. Daenerys knelt before the little bones. Ash puffed softly around her boots. The skull had tilted sideways as if the child had died listening for footsteps that never came. A keeper, Tyrion said quietly, seeing where she looked. Or a daughter, Daenerys answered. She touched the bronze bracelet. The keys clinked once in the hush, impossibly loud. Something answered. A tap from within the nearest cradle. Everyone froze. Daenerys turned slowly. The bronze-green egg had moved. Only a finger's breadth, perhaps less. Yet the ash ring around its base was cracked where it had shifted. Heat flowed off it now more strongly than before. "No one touch it," Jorah said. Daenerys rose and went to it at once. The shell was warm under her palm, warmer than the air, warmer than the channel stones carrying heat from the central shaft. As she touched it, a tremor passed through the egg, faint but unmistakable. A live bee. After centuries in the dark, beneath mountain fire and memory and dust, something within had endured. Missandei covered her mouth. Tyrion sat down abruptly on the edge of a cradle as if his knees had forgotten their use. "By all the gods," he said softly. Daenerys' thoughts ran faster than words. If the clutch had survived this long, how? The heat, yes. The seals. But eggs did not hatch on warmth alone. Not dragon eggs, not always. Her own had needed more. Fire. Blood. Something impossible. Tyrion seemed to read that line of thought in her face. "We could take them as they are," he said quickly. "Wrapped in ash, packed in sand, moved with care. There is no need to attempt anything here." "No need?" Jorah said. "There is every need to leave." Daenerys did not answer. Her hand remained upon the shell. In the mountain's deep hush, she thought she heard not one sound but many. Distant drips, settling stone, the breathing of the hidden fire below, and beneath them all a small, sharp rasp, scratch against shell from within. The second whole egg, the cream and gold, seemed colder by comparison. The third lay farther back, under an overhang of cracked stone, dark as old smoke, banded with pale silver, its surface dull but not dead. She went to it and found that one warm as well, though less strongly. 3 eggs. Not treasure. Not simply that. An inheritance buried by terror and preserved by accident or sorcery until the daughter of another house came to lay her bloody hand upon the door. Drogon descended from the threshold into the cavern proper, claws ringing on the stone. He moved with a curious alertness, neck low, nostrils flaring. When he came beside the bronze-green cradle, he stopped and stared. Rhaegal and Viserion, unwilling to be left out, landed in the doorway in a flurry of wings and snapping tempers, then fell still in their turn. No dragon hissed, no dragon struck. Drogon lowered his head until his snout nearly brushed the egg. A plume of smoke drifted from his nostrils. The shell beneath Daenerys' fingers shivered. Tyrion whispered, "They know." The heat in the chamber deepened by imperceptible degrees. Or perhaps that too, she imagined. Yet the air felt changed, taut as a drawn bowstring. Waiting. Wait. She turned back to the bronze tablets and chose the one least damaged. "Read the last line again." Tyrion found it, tracing the old cuts with one stained finger. "Which?" "The one about sleepers waking." He read, "Let the claim be made by blood of dragon and flame of dragon joined, lest the sleepers wake for their enemies." Sleepers. Eggs. Or something else. The word echoed uncomfortably. Jorah saw the change in her face and stepped closer. "Do not tell me you mean to wake them here." Daenerys looked from him to Tyrion to the eggs. All at once she saw the whole of it. Carrying dormant eggs back through the smoking sea, across rough water, into a city of politics and fear. Hoping they remained alive, hoping they would answer later, in safety. Perhaps they would. Perhaps they would not. Perhaps this chamber, with its living heat and old wards, was the only cradle that had kept them breathing through the long dark. If she left without trying, she might be carrying 3 stones home. If she tried, she might awaken worse than dragons. Her gaze dropped to the child's skeleton and the bronze keys upon its wrist. The child had stayed, had hidden them, had died with them. For what? Not so that they might be taken out cold and forgotten. Not so that they might become mere relics. Daenerys straightened. "We camp here tonight," she said. Jorah swore softly under his breath. "Your Grace," Tyrion began, "I am all in favor of preserving rare wonders when preservation does not involve us becoming part of the ruin. These eggs lived because this place kept them," she said. "If they are to wake, they will wake here. And if they do not, then we leave at dawn with what remains." Jorah's jaw hardened. "This vault is a tomb." "Yes," Daenerys said, "and yet something here still breathes." The hatchery was too hot for sleep. They made what camp they could along the outer wall where the stone breathed only warmth instead of furnace blast. Unsullied stood watch at the door, the galleries, the side corridors that led nowhere but collapsed vents and darkness. No one strayed beyond torchlight. The Dothraki muttered to one another and sharpened blades already sharp. Tyrion translated tablets until his voice went hoarse, then drank sour-watered wine and translated more. Jorah prowled the perimeter like a man who mistrusted every stone. Missandei sat beside the child-keeper's bones for a while in silence, and then laid flowers there. Poor pale little things dried in her satchel from Volantis. Daenerys stood longest beside the eggs. The bronze-green one shivered from time to time. The smoke-dark silver-banded egg answered more slowly, with a warmth that came and went like a deep pulse. The cream and gold remained still, though not cold. She held her hand over each until she could tell their differences as one learns the tempers of horses or men. When she closed her eyes, she heard the same words again and again. Blood of dragon and flame of dragon joined. Not once in all the histories had dragon hatching been an exact craft. Men boasted after the fact. They named causes and ignored chance. Some eggs quickened in cradle warmth under Dragonstone's mountain. Some never did. Some turned to stone and stayed stone for generations. Some answered to sorcery, though every account of such magic seemed written in half-truths and blood. She had lived one miracle already. The world would call a second miracle madness until it happened, and then call it destiny. Near midnight, Tyrion came to stand beside her, carrying a bronze tablet and a look that did not pretend calm. "I have found a line I dislike," he said. "Only one. I make progress." He held up the tablet. "This is written by a keeper rather than a lord. The hand is rougher. It speaks of the house fearing the Freehold would seize the clutch if word spread. It says the fiercest egg was hidden even from their own masters. It says," he swallowed, "if the mountains answer before they return, let fire choose its mother and not the lash." Daenerys turned that over in her mind. Fire choose its mother, not the lash. "The keeper hid them," she said. "So it would seem. Not for the lords. No." Tyrion's gaze drifted toward the child's bones by the wall. "I begin to suspect most of history's grand achievements become easier to understand when one asks what brave small people were trying to save from powerful large ones." Jorah came then, hearing only the end. "And what brave small people try to save is often what powerful large things destroy. Enough. We leave at dawn." Daenerys looked from one man to the other. Tyrion afraid yet fascinated. Jorah afraid and only that. Both loyal in their different ways. Both seeing danger clearly. "I will not take slaves into the fire," she said. "I will not burn men on altars. If the eggs wake, they wake by what is mine to give." Jorah understood at once, and his face went hard with refusal. "No, you do not command me. I would sooner bind you hand and foot than see you bleed for this place." Tyrion rubbed one eye with thumb and forefinger. "I feel compelled to mention that being bound hand and foot in a dragon hatchery would present its own set of inconveniences." Daenerys smiled despite the tension. "Then do not bind me." At dawn she washed in water warmed by the mountain itself, and dressed not in queenly silk or armor, but in a simple dark linen shift belted at the waist. She laid aside chain, jewels, and crown. If power was to answer blood here, she would come to it as herself, not draped in symbols made by men. They cleared a circle around the central shaft and brought the 3 eggs within reach of the hottest channels. Drogon stalked the ring restlessly while Rhaegal and Viserion paced the galleries above, claws skittering on stone. The air shook with their unease. Missandei brought the obsidian rod and the child-keeper's bronze keys. "For remembrance," she said. Daenerys took them and nodded. Then she stepped barefoot into the circle. The stone scorched at once, but not enough to force her back. She had walked through fire before. Pain and fear were sisters too. She knew both by name. Tyrion stood beyond the ring with the tablets stacked in his arms like scriptures stolen from a dead god. Jorah had not moved from the edge, sword still at his hip, though against what he imagined a sword might prevail in such a place Daenerys did not know. Grey Worm and the Unsullied had formed a broad perimeter, expressionless as ever. Missandei stood nearest, tears bright and unhidden, lips moving in a prayer too soft to hear. Daenerys lifted the dagger and cut her palm again. Blood welled, bright against her skin. She let it fall first upon the bronze-green shell. Red streaked down the gleaming ridges and disappeared into the ash crust around the base. Then upon the smoke-dark egg. Then the cream and gold. "By the blood of the dragon," she said in high Valyrian, voice steady despite the heat. "By the house that fled and the house that died. By the child who kept faith in the dark. I claim no lash. I bring no chain. If life remains, let it choose." She touched the obsidian rod to the channel stone. It clicked as the bronze key bracelet did, small and sharp. Then she lifted her face to Drogon. "My son," Drogon screamed. The sound shook dust from the ceiling and sent every man in the chamber reeling back half a pace. He reared up, wings spreading until they seemed to cover the vault. Flame burst from his jaws in a black-red torrent that wrapped the ring in searing light. Rhaegal answered with green-gold fire from above. Viserion followed, pale flame pouring down the outer edge of the circle. Heat hit Daenerys with such force the world vanished into it. The eggs glowed. Pain left her, or became too large to call pain. She stood in a storm of fire and did not burn. Blood ran down her wrist. The bronze keys in her left hand grew so hot they should have fused into her skin, yet they did not. The hatchery dissolved. Valyria rose around her. Not ruin this time, but splendor. Black roads full of litters, towers like spear points, balconies overflowing with torchlight and silk. Dragons of every color crossing the sky above terraces, bright with music. Daenerys stood in the heart of the Freehold and knew it at once for both wonder and horror. She smelled wine, incense, molten metal, human fear. In the streets below, the dragonlords' palaces, chained men hauled ore carts toward furnaces set in the bellies of the hills. On the upper ways, lords in silvered tokar laughed and wagered over races in the air. The earth trembled beneath it all. A child ran through the crowd. The girl from the courtyard. Leather apron. Bare feet. Silver hair wild with sweat and ash. She clutched an egg wrapped in red cloth and looked over one shoulder as if expecting pursuit. No one saw her. Not the lords. Not the guards. Not the laborers bent under chains. She slipped down a side passage into heat and shadow. Daenerys followed. They descended winding stairs cut through smoking rock. The tremors strengthened. Somewhere above, dragons screamed. Men began shouting. Bells rang. The girl reached the hatchery and laid the wrapped egg into a cradle with hands that shook but did not fumble. 2 other eggs already lay there. She turned the bronze keys in the locks. She took blood from her own palm and smeared it on the door. "Not for them," she whispered in a language older than Daenerys knew. Yet, in the dream, Daenerys understood. For the one who comes after. For the mother fire chooses. No, I can. The ceiling split with a roar. Red lights swallowed everything. Daenerys opened her eyes to the present and found she was on her knees in the ring, one hand braced against blazing stone. The bronze-green egg was cracking. A line had opened along its shell from top to base, and through that line seeped not blood but golden red light. The shell trembled again, harder this time. A piece broke free and fell inward. Something moved inside. Missandei cried out. Tyrion whispered a prayer he did not believe in. Jorah took one step forward and stopped only because Drogon swung his great head and bared his teeth without looking away from the egg. The shell split wider. A wet muzzle thrust through, bronze scaled and black at the snout, teeth white as fish bones. Then a foreclaw, tiny by dragon measure but armed already with curved translucent hooks. The hatchling ripped at the shell with fierce, desperate jerks, screaming in a voice thin as a blade of metal. Daenerys reached out instinctively. The little dragon fell half into her hands. He was slick with fluid and ash, bronze over the body, darker along the spine where green became almost black. Membranous wings unfurled in a clumsy rush, veined with deep jade. He snapped at the air, at the shell, at her fingers. When she laughed through the tears she had not known were on her face, he bit the heel of her thumb hard enough to draw another bead of blood. His eyes opened. Molten gold. Clear. Furious. Alive. Drogon made a sound Daenerys had never heard from him before. Low and resonant and almost astonished. The smoke-dark egg trembled. The second egg moved before anyone could speak. Not the gentle tremor of a shell waking. A violent convulsion that sent ash spilling from the cradle in a ring. The cream and gold egg, cold and beautiful and silent until now, did nothing. But the smoke-dark one gave a hard crack that echoed through the chamber like stone splitting under frost. And something deep below answered. The floor jolted. Unsullied staggered. Dust burst from every seam overhead. One of the hanging chains began to swing, clanging against the wall. From the central shaft came a roar not made by dragon. Not quite, but close enough to scrape the spine. Tyrion's face emptied of every clever expression at once. "Sleepers," he said. A second jolt threw him against a cradle. The lava glow in the shaft flared brighter. Heat rushed up in a blast. From some lower vent beyond the ring came a sound of scraping, wet and furious, magnified through stone. Grey Worm's voice cut across the chaos like a blade. "Shields! Form at the door!" Unsullied moved at once, terror no quicker than discipline. Jorah seized Daenerys by the arm. "We leave. Now." "Men?" She snatched up the newly hatched bronze dragon, cradling him against her chest despite his snapping. With the other hand she reached for the smoke-dark egg. It was hotter than the first had been, burning through the cloth she wrapped around it. The cream and gold shell rocked once, twice, then split along the middle and collapsed inward in a puff of gray dust. Nothing within. Whatever life had been there had died long ago, and only emptiness remained. No time to mourn it. The scraping became a shriek. Something burst from a fissure in the lower wall beneath one of the galleries in a spray of shattered stone and steam. At first, Daenerys could not understand what she saw. It was too long, too pale, too wrong. A thing like a worm made monstrous and armed with hooked limbs near the head, skin translucent in places so that orange heat glowed faintly within. Its mouth gaped in petals ringed with black teeth. Blind, it writhed out half its length and struck at the nearest movement. The Dothraki screamed and leapt back. One was not fast enough. The thing caught him round the thigh and tore him off his feet. Blood flashed black in the heat. "Fireworm!" Tyrion shouted, scrambling backward on one hand and two knees. Gods. Drogon dropped from the ring like a thunderbolt. Flame engulfed the creature's head. It shrieked and thrashed, smashing a cradle to fragments. Stone rained down from above. Another fissure cracked open on the far side of the chamber. Grey Worm gave no sign of fear. "Retreat!" he shouted. "Protect the queen." The Unsullied fell back by ranks, shields up, spears angled, buying space while the dragon's fire turned the air to a furnace. Jorah drew Daenerys toward the door. Missandei grabbed Tyrion by the sleeve and hauled him upright with a strength born of terror. The smoke-dark egg convulsed in Daenerys' arms. Through the cloth she felt sharp movement from within. One claw perhaps, striking shell. The child-sized bronze dragon on her chest hissed furiously at every burst of flame. A second fireworm erupted from the central shaft's rim, smaller than the first but quicker, its skin redder and slick with molten slime. It lunged past Drogon's tail toward the retreating men. One Unsullied took the head cleanly through the mouth and died with the spear still in his hands when the hooked limbs tore him open. Another stepped over the body without faltering. Then the ceiling cracked. Not a small shower this time. A whole seam. Stone the size of wagons sheared loose from above the upper gallery and plummeted. Jorah shoved Daenerys bodily sideways. The boulders smashed down where she had stood, shattering the cradle beside it into 100 burning shards. One struck Jorah across the shoulder. He grunted but did not fall. Blood darkened his sleeve almost at once. "Ser Jorah, move." They ran. The hatchery's outer corridor sloped upward toward the bronze doors. Beyond them, the terrace had darkened to a storm-red twilight, though little time could have passed. Ash poured from the sky now in thick, bitter drifts. Behind them, the chamber rang with dragon shrieks, men shouting, and the awful wet grinding of the worms. Rhaegal burst overhead through the doorway and slammed against the corridor roof with a scream of anger, scorching the walls green gold. Viserion followed, white flame in his wake. Drogon came last, backing out of the hatchery in snarling leaps to keep his body between the retreat and what surged behind. Daenerys stumbled on broken stone. The smoke-dark egg nearly slipped from her arms. A hard point punched outward from within and held. "It's hatching," Missandei gasped. Tyrion coughed black grit. Could it not choose a less inconvenient moment? A roar rolled through the mountain. The terrace shuddered. One of the bronze door leaves sagged from its hinge and crashed outward in a storm of green metal fragments. Grey Worm counted men without looking back. 9 gone, he said. Go. Down the side road they fled, the black Dragonroad ahead barely visible through falling ash. The world had narrowed to heat and choking breath, and the thunder of wings. Dothraki formed the rear with arcs ready, hair and cloaks powdered gray. Twice Daenerys heard movement pacing them from the broken terraces beyond sight, a dragging rustle through slag and stone. Once a shape longer than a ship's mast reared in the murk atop a ridge and vanished again before she could make sense of it. Whether beast or smoke, she never knew. At the broken courtyard basin, she nearly fell to her knees. The little bronze hatchling had climbed from her chest to her shoulder and was clinging there, wings plastered to his sides, mouth open in a silent scream of outrage. The smoke-dark egg gave another crack. A jagged line split across its top. Heat licked through the torn cloak. Jorah's breathing had turned ragged. Blood soaked his arm and dripped from his fingers. "You're hurt badly. I have been hurt worse. Not by mountains." Tyrion staggered at her other side, face gray under soot. "For once," he panted, "I should like a horse, even one of the stupid ones." A section of road ahead heaved upward as if some giant hand pressed beneath it. Black stone cracked. Steam burst out. Unsullied leapt aside. Grey Worm shouted an order. Daenerys heard Drogon behind them, roaring at something in the ash, and then the slamming impact of claws. The smoke-dark egg exploded. Not fully. One end gave way in a shower of black shell and hot fluid. A small head forced through, darker than Drogon's scales, but edged at the brow with pale silver horns still soft from birth. Its eyes were shut. It coughed a burst of smoke straight into Daenerys' face and began ripping free with frantic little claws. She laughed then, half despair, half joy, because there was nothing else to do. She tucked the broken shell under one arm, caught the writhing hatchling against her body with the other, and ran on. By the time they reached the sea gate, the mountain behind them was roaring steadily. Not like one beast, but like 1,000 throats speaking at once. The cove below swam in hot mist. Men on the ships were already hacking anchor lines and hauling at oars. One of the smaller vessels had drifted too near a vent and now smoked along the port side where boiling water lapped. "Get her aboard," Jorah shouted. Grey Worm sent half his remaining men down the stair first and half to hold the gatehouse. An instant later, that command saved them. From the broken arch behind came a blind red-white length of fireworm, smaller than those in the hatchery but fast as a whip. It lunged into the rear rank. Spears struck. It wrapped itself around a pillar and tore it half away. Unsullied died there, holding it long enough for the others to descend. Daenerys reached the sand as the first ship shoved off. The water at the shoreline was hot enough to steam around her boots. Sailors reached down and hauled Missandei, then Tyrion, then the two hatchlings swaddled in Daenerys' scorched cloak. Jorah refused help until she was aboard, then nearly collapsed when Grey Worm dragged him over the rail by sheer force. Drogon took wing from the cliff in a blast of cinders. Rhaegal and Viserion followed close. The remaining men on the beach shoved the last boat free and threw themselves into it as ash thickened into a gray-red curtain. Then the cliffside gave way. Stone, stairs, gatehouse. An entire section of the cove's wall sheared off with a sound like the sky tearing. It plunged into the water where they had stood moments before. Steam billowed so high it blotted the land. Through it, Daenerys glimpsed the terrace road collapsing one span after another, swallowed by smoke. No one spoke until the ships had pulled clear of the hidden inlet and found open water again. Only then did Tyrion sink to the deck where he stood, cough until tears ran down his cheeks, and say in a hoarse, broken voice, "I should like it recorded somewhere that I was right." Missandei laughed once, shakily, and then began to cry in earnest. Daenerys knelt by Jorah, who sat propped against the mast with his torn shoulder bound in a strip of linen already brightening red. His face had gone pale under soot, but his eyes remained clear. "You live," he said to her. She wanted to tell him not to speak. Instead, she touched his good hand. Around them, the crew moved like men waking from a nightmare they did not trust to end. Grey Worm counted the dead aloud in the old calm voice of an Unsullied training yard. The numbers were fewer than they should have been, and more than Daenerys could bear. On the deck beside her, the bronze hatchling gnawed savagely at a strip of salted fish one of the sailors had pushed toward it with shaking fingers. The darker hatchling lay half in the crook of her cloak, still damp, breathing smoke in tiny, furious bursts. Valyria receded behind them into storm and steam, but from somewhere within the smoke, there came once, faintly, a roar vast enough that even Drogon turned his head. The return from Valyria was quieter than the outward voyage, not because fear had lessened, but because it had changed shape. No man aboard needed tales any longer. They carried proof in burns, bloodstains, and memory. The dead were named each evening at sunset. Grey Worm spoke each name once and no more. Even the Dothraki listened without interruption. Tyrion poured a drop of wine over the rail after each recitation and never once made a joke during it. Jorah's wound fevered on the second day. Missandei and a ship's healer cleaned it with boiled wine and packed it with poultices until he swore at them with enough vigor to reassure all concerned. The hot shard that had struck him had sliced flesh and bruised bone but not poisoned him, or so they prayed. By the time Volantis was a rumor behind them, and the air lost the taste of sulfur, the fever had broken. Jorah slept then with the exhaustion of a man dragged back from a ledge. The hatchlings did not sleep nearly so much. The bronze-green one proved fierce from the first. He snapped at anyone but Daenerys and tolerated even her hands only when there was food to follow. He liked the rail in full sun and the curve of Drogon's foreleg when the great black dragon chose to descend to deck. His scales dried to a rich burnished bronze along the body with dark green frills at the jaw and spine, and when he spread his wings, the membranes glimmered like polished jade held to the light. The smoke-dark hatchling was no gentler, only quieter in his fury. He preferred shadow, nesting in coils of rope or beneath folded canvas, until hunger woke him. His scales were black touched with iron gray, but his horns and the edges of his wing bones shone pale silver, almost white. Once, when Tyrion bent too close to marvel, the little dragon sneezed smoke in his face and bit through the tip of the parchment he held. "I am being educated," Tyrion said, drawing his hand back just in time. Daenerys watched them with a wonder that never quite settled into calm. Dragons grew quickly. Already, before Meereen's coast returned to view, both hatchlings could climb from deck to mast in clumsy skips. They yowled for strips of fish and goat, and once, to the disgust of half the crew and delight of the Dothraki, fought over a gull foolish enough to settle within reach. Drogon regarded them with an air of grave, proprietary disdain. Rhaegal snapped whenever they strayed too near his perch. Viserion watched with bright, hungry curiosity. 5 dragons. The thought had a weight to it. Not triumph only. Burdened, promise. Threat. Guy. On the 5th night after their escape, when the ships ran under a clear sky and Slaver's Bay lay still as blue silk beneath the stars, Tyrion came to her at the stern with one of the recovered bronze tablets wrapped in cloth. "I nearly forgot," he said. "Almost being eaten by subterranean nightmares can be distracting." He unwrapped the tablet and set it on a coil of rope between them. Unlike the others, this one had writing on both sides. One face was the clipped formal record of clutches, pairings, hatch dates. The other had been scratched later, more crudely, in a smaller hand. "The Keeper again," Daenerys said. "So, I think?" Tyrion traced the lines. "I have spent 2 evenings with this and several cups of wine. The sense is clearer now. Listen, they beat the young with hot rods and call it tempering. They bind the old and call it mastery. But fire is no slave. It remembers who comes in hunger and who comes in love." Missandei, seated nearby with a bowl of water for the hatchlings, looked up sharply. Tyrion continued, "Then, if they return, let them find only ash. If another blood should come, let it be kinder than ours." Daenerys closed her eyes briefly. Kinder than ours. She had gone into the ruins seeking power and blood memory and answers. She had found those, but she had found accusation as well. Not against her alone. Against the very inheritance men kept trying to place on her shoulders like a mantle woven of destiny and right. Valyria had not been wronged merely by the Doom. Valyria had done wrong enough to call Doom down if the world worked by such balances. She looked at the bronze-green hatchling who had torn his meal in half and was glaring at the darker one over the scraps. Fierce little king. And the other, lurking with smoke curling from his nostrils like some insult too proud to speak aloud. Their existence could turn cities to obedience before they were grown. She knew that. Everyone would know it soon. "What would you name them?" Missandei asked softly. Daenerys smiled faintly. "I've been wondering the same." Tyrion lifted one brow. "Might I advise against names that are too easy to shout while fleeing?" She ignored him. Her gaze moved to the stars over the mast. The house that had fled. The dreamer who had seen doom before it came. The man who believed his daughter's dream and took his family into exile while greater lords laughed. "Enar," she said after a long while, touching the darker hatchling lightly along the spine. "For the one who carried our house away from fire." The little dragon turned and bit her thumb, less fiercely than before. "And this one," she said, letting the bronze hatchling climb onto her forearm with all the dignity of a storm in miniature. "Daenerys, for the dream that saved us." Missandei smiled. Tyrion inclined his head. "Better names than Doom and more Doom, which had been my private suggestions." When Marine's pyramids appeared on the horizon, pale as teeth in the morning haze, the harbor erupted before the ships had crossed half the bay. Word ran faster than oars. Trumpets sounded from the walls. Bells rang from the temple quarter. Men crowded the docks until soldiers drove them back, and even then the quays remained black with people. They had heard that their queen had gone to Volantis. They had not expected her to return crowned with more dragons. Drogon announced them first, descending from the clouds in a shadow vast enough to send whole files of dock workers sprawling. Rhaegal and Viserion followed with shrieks that bounced from pyramid to pyramid. Then Daenerys stepped to the prow in black riding leathers crusted still with ash and seams the laundresses had not quite conquered, and on either side of her perched the new hatchlings, Daenerys on the rail, bronze wings half spread, Enar crouched nearer her shoulder with smoke drifting from his jaws. The harbor went silent. Not wholly silent. Water slapped wood. Gulls cried. Somewhere a child shouted her name in delight and was shushed at once. But the great human murmur of a city stopped as if a hand had closed over its mouth. Tyrion leaned close and murmured, "I am pleased to report that astonishment remains among mankind's more attractive expressions." Then the cheering began. Freedmen fell to their knees. Priests of every god lifted prayers. Former masters stared upward with faces gone the color of curdled milk. Dario mounted on a black horse at the quay, threw back his head and laughed like a man watching his own boldest boast come true against reason. Daenerys descended the gangplank slowly, not for grandeur, but because both hatchlings insisted on clinging to her as if the world beyond the ship might steal them. Missandei and Grey Worm followed close. Jorah came later, pale but upright. Tyrion descended, wiping ash from his sleeve, and looking as if he had swallowed 3 histories, and was still uncertain they would agree with one another. Dario met her at the foot of the quay. For once, there was no easy joke ready on his tongue. He looked from the hatchlings to her face, and something like understanding passed through the bright bravado. "You brought fire home," he said. "No," Daenerys answered. She looked past him to the city she had won and held and nearly let bind her forever. "I brought a choice." That evening she stood again, upon the high terrace of the Great Pyramid, where Tyrion had first laid the blackened scroll before her. Meereen glowed below as it had then, yet nothing was the same. The Red Priests had already begun shouting in the streets that the Mother of Dragons had walked the smoking heart of the world and returned with the lost children of Valyria. Freedmen lit candles on their thresholds. Former masters sent gifts too rich and too careful. Mothers clutched their children when the dragons passed overhead, even as those children stared in awe. Power gathered swiftly around miracles, faster than grain around hungry hands. She could feel it. Tyrion came to stand beside her, cup in hand, his eyes following Daenerys as the little dragon clambered along the parapet with all the reckless balance of youth. "I burned the worst of the Keeper's writings," Daenerys said before he could speak. He looked at her. The blood magic? The words that spoke of binding, mastering, breeding by pain. She rested her hands on the warm stone. "I kept the histories, not the instructions." Tyrion was quiet a moment. "A prudent decision. Is it?" She looked out over the city. "Or a foolish one? There is knowledge in those writings men would kill for." "Yes," he said. "Which is an excellent reason not to leave it lying about where men may kill for it." She smiled despite herself. Then the smile faded. "When I walked those ruins," she said softly, "I thought at first I was seeking my beginning. But Valyria is not my beginning, Tyrion. Not truly. Dragonstone is. Exile is. The sea is. A girl sold to a Khal in a world that thought her harmless. If I let old Valyria name me, I become part of its grave. No, he studied her sidelong. "And if the world insists on naming you anyway." Daenerys looked up. 5 dragons crossed the twilight now. Black, green, cream white, bronze, and smoke-dark silver. The youngest still small enough that the older 3 seemed gods beside them. Yet they were alive. All of them. The sky itself looked changed for holding so many. "Then I will answer in my own name," she said. In the days that followed, Meereen learned new rhythms. The people learned to look up more often. At dawn, the dragons took the sky together, though the hatchlings soon tired and returned to the pyramid roofs or the harbor towers to bask. Daenerys favored sun-baked stone and heights from which to pounce on anything foolish enough to move below. Aenar preferred shadowed arches and the cool caves under the pyramid, emerging at odd hours in coils of smoke that sent servants shrieking in every direction. Drogon tolerated them in the manner of a king who has accepted 2 unruly heirs into his hall, because no one else is fit to judge them. Rhaegal resented everyone equally. Viserion only watched, thoughtful and pale as moonlit bone. The city changed under their passage. The sons of the Harpy vanished as if a wind had scattered them. Masters who had spoken boldly in private now bowed till their brows touched the floor. The red temples filled. So did the markets, the docks, the barracks. Hope, fear, and opportunity bred quickly in warm places. Daenerys felt them all moving under Meereen's skin like shifting water. She met with her council in rooms open to the sea, where the dragons could come and go by the broad arches. Tyrion spread maps of Westeros and the narrow sea. Grey Worm counted ships and grain. Missandei read reports from Yunkai Astapor's remnants, Volantis. Jorah said little unless asked, but when he spoke all listened, perhaps because men had seen the bandaged wound on his shoulder and guessed poorly at where it had been earned. Dario urged haste. "Every day you spend here," he said, sprawling in a chair as if chairs had been invented for his irreverence. "Is a day your enemies across the sea-built walls and whisper tales to make children piss themselves. Better to arrive while the stories are still growing." "The stories have already grown teeth," Tyrion said dryly. "Then let them bite." Dort. Daenerys listened to them all. At the end of 3 days, she gave the commands that turned preparation into departure. Dario would remain with the second sons and a council of freedmen and chosen nobles to keep Meereen. Grey Worm would take the Unsullied west. Missandei would sail beside her. Tyrion would serve as hand, whether he liked the title or not. Jorah would go where she went unless she commanded otherwise, and she did not. When she told Dario he was to stay, he smiled with his mouth and not with his eyes. "You send me a city again. I send you a trust," she said. "I would rather have the woman." There was too much truth in that. She touched his hand once and withdrew. "I am not a prize to leave or carry." "No," he said softly. "You are the storm." He bowed over her knuckles as he had on the quay before Valyria, and this time when he straightened, he did not ask again. The night before they sailed, Daenerys climbed alone to the highest terrace of the pyramid. The city slept in layers beneath her, its noises softened by darkness. A dog barking in some alley, the clatter of a late cart, laughter from a wine shop, the soft, constant rush of tide against quay stone. Above, the stars burned cold and ancient. The same stars had hung over Valyria when it was whole, the same when it died. She thought of the child keeper whose bones lay in the hatchery, of hands bloodied by bronze keys, of a whispered plea that whatever blood came after might be kinder. She thought of viseries speaking of dragonlords as though the word itself made cruelty splendid. She thought of the slave collar half fused around dead bone in the ruined hall, of the kneeling figures carved beneath beautiful lords, of Enar listening to a dream and choosing exile over arrogance, of Daenerys seeing doom while greater men laughed. The wind stirred her hair. "What would you have me be?" she asked the dark, though she did not know whether she spoke to dead ancestors, to gods she half trusted, or only to herself. No answer came in words. Instead, wings beat once above her, and Drogon descended to the terrace with a softness his size should never have allowed. Daenerys followed, then Enar, who landed badly, skidded, hissed at the stone as if it had insulted him, and then climbed into the crook of Drogon's foreleg, as though the great black dragon had always been meant to shelter him. Rhaegal and Viserion circled once overhead and vanished into the stars. Daenerys laid her palm against Drogon's neck. "I will not be Queen of Ash," she whispered. The words had haunted her since the House of the Undying, since dreams and warnings and the way men looked at dragons and saw only endings. Yet in Valyria she had learned something harsher. Ash could be inheritance as easily as threat. Men who built empires with fire always believed the cinders would spare them. Not hers, she vowed. Not if she could help it. At dawn, the fleet put out. Sails snapped white and black against the brightening east. Oars bit water in long shining lines. The harbor of Meereen filled with shouting until the very pyramids seemed to tremble under it. Freedmen raised chains broken into garlands. Priests waved censers. Children ran along the seawalls, calling the dragons' names in voices too high to carry far, yet Daenerys heard them all the same. She stood at the prow of the flagship in a dark coat clasped with silver and red. Not a girl anymore. Not the frightened sister sold across the world. Not only the queen who had learned the cost of compromise in Meereen. Not only the daughter of a dead house, nor the heir to an empire of ghosts. Tyrion stood a few paces behind her with the wind tugging his hair into disobedience. Missandei beside him looked west with clear, steady eyes. Grey Worm's spear butt rested against the deck, his face unreadable as carved bronze. Jorah stood near the mast, one hand on the rigging, as though he could hold the whole ship upright by loyalty alone. "The West," Tyrion said quietly, coming forward at last to stand beside her. "Are you ready for it?" "No," Daenerys said. He glanced at her. "An honest queen. The world grows stranger by the hour." She almost laughed. Then she looked out again and saw, not the line of the sea alone, but beyond it a throne built from swords and stories, a kingdom riven by old wounds, lords who would kneel or burn or plot or love or betray. She saw the road ahead and knew that more ruins waited there, though not all had yet been made. Every crown was a wager with history, every conquest a temptation, every dragon a test. Behind them the east smoked with memory. Before them, the west waited to be written. Drogon screamed over the fleet. Rhaegal answered. Valyrian flashed pale fire in the morning sun. Daenerys burst upward after them in a bronze blaze of unsteady wings, and Enar followed in a dark dart of smoke and silver, fierce as hunger. 5 dragons crossed the sky. Men on every deck looked up and shaded their eyes. Some smiled, some wept, some feared. Daenerys welcomed all 3. Fear alone made tyrants. Wonder alone made fools. She would need a world that could still feel both if she meant to change it. The wind freshened from the east. To go forward, you must go back, Quaid had once told her. She had gone back into smoke and blood and buried memory, and she had come away not with a map to destiny, but with a warning writ in fire. The old world was ash, because it had believed itself eternal. Daenerys Targaryen set her face toward Westeros and let the salt air fill her lungs. She would not restore Valyria. She would outlive it,